This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 95 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and glad you've tuned in to the podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. Glad you found us. Glad you're listening. If you're coming back for more, glad you're back. And hope you've taken time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, and share with your friends as well. I'm always love to get the word out, and the feedback I get from folks is that the podcast is helpful as I want it to be. And so thanks for all your comments and just the feedback I get from you. It's so helpful, and it's just affirming to know that what we're doing here is helpful to people. But anyway, it's as I'm recording this, we're getting ready to start the here in the United States, the Labor Day weekend. You know, one of the things I have to remind myself is that not everyone that's listening to the podcast is necessarily here in the U.S., and a lot of our holidays might not line up with the rest of the world. And I know that Labor Day is one of those holidays. I don't think many other countries actually celebrate this weekend. It's always the first weekend of September, or first Monday of September. But it's also the official end of summer or unofficial end of summer. So as I mentioned last week, everybody's getting geared up for school starting, and has already started, and we're just getting into that change of the season. So the fall is my favorite time of the year. I just love the weather and the change we've had. In fact, the last few days here in East Tennessee has just been absolutely gorgeous, just cool, crisp nights and not a cloud in the sky during the day, and warm. And oh gosh, I just love it. So I'm hoping to get outside some this weekend. Anyway, I'm excited about our guest today. He's a returning guest, Rob Reinhardt from Tame Your Practice. Rob, I've really enjoyed getting to know Rob, and Rob is one of those one of the early, I guess, really one of those people that early on started into this whole private practice consulting and that sort of thing. But what Rob is really known for are his electronic health record reviews, and he's really carved out a niche around that. And if you're trying to figure out your electronic health records and want to get some comparisons and all of that sort of thing, Rob does a great job at looking at all of those and helping people find the best fit for them in their practice. You know, one of the sponsors of this podcast is TherapyNotes, and I know that's on the near the top of his list of ones that he recommends. But anyway, you can check that out. But the thing about Rob is that also he's not only a therapist and works as a counselor and has a private practice in North Carolina. Rob has really kind of taken this whole idea about diversifying streams of income and creating other ways of producing income for yourself within the whole realm of this therapy counselor space. And so he's going to be talking about that and a new not a new product, but an expansion of a product that he already has called the Describe cards, which are really a clinical tool that you can use in sessions. So looking forward to getting to Rob here. That was a lot about him, and he's going to repeat a lot of this, but I'm just excited to have Rob here on the podcast. One other thing to mention here before we get to Rob is that we do have a free webinar coming up on September the 13th. And the title of the webinar is just simply How to Make Money in Private Practice. And it's going to really be focusing in on how you can really create success for yourself financially in private practice. You know, as you've heard from me before, one of the things we never really learn in graduate school is the whole financial side of private practice. But I'm teaming up with Julie Harris from Green Oak Accounting, who's the sponsor for this month and of the podcast, and she's going to share her expertise, and we're going to be having a great conversation for you to listen into when the webinar, and that just talking about some of the tips for making your practice profitable. Also go into some of the common mistakes that people make, common financial mistakes people make. And then also we're going to be talking about how you can learn more in terms of really becoming a financial expert for your practice, because that's such an important piece. And the other thing Julie's going to be sharing in the webinar are what she calls her ratios for success. She works exclusively with therapists and counselors. And so over time, she has learned kind of where you want to be financially in terms of overhead costs, in terms of profitability, and where you should be kind of with that. And so she's going to share that in the webinar. And that's just really some interesting stuff. I think a lot of times we don't really know how well we're doing. And it's good to have a comparison with other people in the same field, just knowing, you know, how they're doing and what are some good benchmarks for your practice financially, of learning all that. So I want to invite you to join the free webinar. It's going to be a free live webinar, and you can get to that. You can just go to practiceoftherapy.com, and at the top of the page, there'll be a little banner there where you can register, or you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/how to make money. A little cheesy, I know, but I just thought that was just straight to the point. But anyway, if you'll go over and check that out and register, and even if you don't think you'll be able to be there on September the 13th, it's going to be at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Even if you don't think you'll be able to attend, do sign up for the webinar, because that way you can get the recording later. The downside is that you won't be able to be there to ask questions during the webinar. But anyway, I want to invite you to that. I'm really excited about it, and I'm so excited to be teaming up with Julie for this particular project and this particular webinar. Again, just teaching you some good stuff and some valuable information. So again, as I mentioned, I've got Rob Reinhardt with me again today for the podcast, and looking forward to you hearing from Rob and just gleaning from his knowledge and wisdom. So without further ado, here is Rob Reinhardt. Well, hello, folks, and welcome back to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And hello, Rob. Welcome back.
Hey, Gordon. It's good to be back.
Yes. So I was with Rob and I were just talking. I was can't remember if he's been on here two times prior or not, but anyway, Rob's a regular, and I'm glad to have you. But
well, we
Rob,
have so much fun that one time feels like 5 times, right?
Yes, right. That's right. It's just the fun never ends. But yeah, so glad to have Rob Reinhardt from Tame Your Practice back on. And Rob's got some exciting stuff that he's developed. And I really wanted him to just kind of tell the story of how he has put some products together to really kind of diversify what he does as a therapist, and just hopefully give you some creative ideas around that. Plus, he's got a really cool resource that you might just want for your practice. It's a great clinical resource. So, Rob, welcome back.
Hey, Gordon. Good. It's always good to be back.
Yes. So
whether it's the second or fourth time.
Yeah, I know. I'm still kind of recovering from the stomach bug, so my head's a little fuzzy.
My head's fuzzy because it's Monday, so we're on the same page.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So, Rob, tell folks what you've been working on.
Oh my gosh, so much. So most people know me. I'd say the majority of people know me from Tame Your Practice. I'm the guy that reviews the EHR. So you've gone out hunting to decide which EHR you want for your practice, you've probably been to the Tame Your Practice website. I've been writing reviews of those EHRs for 10 years now, and helping people choose one that fits their practice, as well as other software, whether it's telehealth or texting or email. But what people are often surprised to find out is that I'm also the creator of Describe cards, because people know me as the tech guy, but this is an actual clinical tool that I developed. So it started really, honestly, 12 years ago when I was in my practicum and internship. And I just came to this realization that, the words that I'm regularly trying to get from my clients are adjectives. Adjectives are where it's at. Emotions are adjectives. The way people feel about other people in their lives are adjectives. If you ask somebody to tell you about themselves, and they might say, well, I'm a computer programmer and my spouse is a truck driver, and I play basketball in my spare time. These are all good pieces of information. That's important. But when they start to say, oh, well, my partner is sad and lonely, and those kinds of words, now we're getting into the adjectives, the kind of stuff we need to hear to do our work. And so I realized that, and I started to tinker with some cards that had adjectives on it. I realized that even people that are very verbose, perfectly comfortable talking about emotions, still would find it easier to pull out the words that they wanted if they're on these cards already. They're not having to sift through their brain and come up with just the right word. They can just go through these adjective cards, and I'd start asking people to pick out 5 cards that describe themselves, 5 cards that describe somebody else. And all that, over the years, I'd refined it, developed it into Describe cards. So it's a deck of cards. There's over 3 dozen activities now that you can do with it. And then I've launched Deck 2 because people wanted more cards. And now the most recent thing is the activity board that's come out. It's literally just got it in this weekend.
Wow.
As soon as I get off this interview with you, I'm packing up the pre-orders. A number of people pre-ordered it, and they get their copy first. So I've got to get those packed up and shipped out today.
Wow. So describe the Describe board. And you were kind of telling me the story about how that idea came about. If you don't mind, share with folks that how that whole idea came to fruition.
Oh yeah, I love this story. It's not just a great story, but it helps me keep things in perspective because I'm an idea person. I'm one of those people that if I had unlimited resources, whether it's money, time, whatever, I could just sit back and come up with ideas and gather a group of people and just make all these cool things happen because my head's just regularly going. So, one of those ideas was, hey, I want to, when I'm at conferences promoting Describe, do something really interactive, get people in the booth, let them kind of get a feel for what it's like to use the Describe card. So I made these, what we called selfie boards. It's like a 14 by 17 foam board. And I laminated some adjectives, same adjectives you can find on the cards. And I'd have people come in to the booth and say, hey, the board says, how do I describe myself? They'd pick out 4 or 5 adjectives, stick them to the board, and take a selfie. So it was a good way for them to see what it's like to use the Describe cards, plus, be social and interactive. And what I didn't predict, even though I'm this idea guy that's always thinking of cool new things, was that people started asking me how much it cost to buy the boards.
Oh, wow.
So I totally didn't see that coming. And so then I had to think, okay, people want these boards. What am I going to do?
Yes.
Because these were just some foam boards. They're not, they looked really nice, but they're not going to hold up long term with this kind of activity. And they would be too expensive to produce them because of their size and these various other things. I'm like, but people want them. What do I do? And so it took me several months of research to figure out, okay, this is a way I can make the boards. It even allows them to use the Describe cards they already have. Plus, it's got a dry erase surface, so they can write on it and do different prompts and activities on the board. All because, I would have never, I can't say I would have never, but I don't know if I would have thought of this if people hadn't come along and said, hey, we want this board. And that's kind of an important part of coming up with a new product. It's one thing to have an idea.
Yeah.
It's another thing to actually execute it. And there's a number of quotes out there from a number of prominent people that say, hey, it's not the idea, it's the execution. Because lots of people have similar ideas. It's who follows through. And it's also knowing that it's something people will use and knowing that they'll want it. So obviously I had an advantage here because I already knew people wanted this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It wasn't like, oh, I've got this cool idea, I'm going to make it and hope that people want it.
Right.
I knew they wanted it.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's one of those things that is an important step. I've kind of learned this from, I don't know if you follow or not, Pat Flynn, but he wrote a book called Will It Fly? And it just talks about how you verify an idea or a product to know if it's something that people really want or not. And what I love about that story is you kind of got your product verified on the front end by people asking for it before you even had the product. So that's
right.
so cool. Yeah.
It was inadvertent market research, because that's really something you have to do. Okay, make a prototype, or at least put the idea, do focus groups, talk to people. Hey, is this something you would use? And then you do iterations of it, because they give you feedback. Oh, well, I'd use it if it was like this, or if you change this thing. And that's how you do the research and development, the R&D, and trying a product. But I got all that without even expecting that I was going to be doing that. So,
yes. Right. Yeah, that's cool. Well, one of the things that has been, as we talked about before we started recording, seems like it's been kind of a theme here lately on the podcast, is just thinking about ways to diversify your income in your practice beyond just the one-to-one kind of face-to-face contact that we have with clients, which is really as I like to say, the meat and potatoes of what we do as therapists. But what helps in order to really to kind of make your practice a little more stable is diversify your streams of income. And one of the ways to do that is to create products and services that are really, once they're developed, are almost kind of passive income in a way. Now, certainly, you would attest to the fact that there's no true passive income, because you put a ton of work into the things that you've developed. But what have you learned so far about doing that? About going from kind of stepping from just kind of the traditional therapy kind of thing to not only with Tame your practice and the services and courses and things that you offer there, but now to a couple physical products.
Yeah, I've learned a lot of things. I mean, we could drill down into the details of how do you produce an actual deck of cards. Even just that discussion could take us an hour, because there's so much. You think, oh, it's just a deck of cards, but there's so many considerations from, okay, well, what quality of cards are you going to get? Are you going to produce them here or across the ocean somewhere? And how is that going to affect your costs? And it just goes on forever. So there's all those logistical and practical things that I've picked up from publishing Describe, from self-publishing books. But in a more general sense, the big thing for me, being that idea person, is really having to take some time and prioritize. Make sure that an idea is viable before darting down that path. And then deciding, okay, I've only got so much bandwidth. There's only so many hours in the day. What things am I going to really dedicate myself into and really focus on making be successful? Because if I followed every idea, none of them would be really fully executed the way they needed to be, and wouldn't really have that support. You talked about nothing is really passive, and it's not. I tend to use the word residual instead of, residual income instead of passive, but even that is not quite active enough, because I still have to hoof it for marketing, especially with Describe. Tame Your Practice kind of supports itself. That's been around for 10 years. I've got excellent search engine optimization, SEO. So when people are looking for EHRs, they just naturally end up on my site. At Describe, I'm still doing a lot of work in the marketing arena. And so if I had another great idea, I mean, it was all I all I had to get this activity board going, because I've already got deck 1 and deck 2, and now I've got this third product to promote. So I've got to really prioritize my time and, again, make sure I'm leaving time. And this is important for everybody in our field, is leaving time for self-care, making sure it's
right.
all work.
Right, right. Yeah, so with the describe cards, can you kind of give us a thumbnail sketch of kind of that process of maybe from the very beginning all the way up to, the board coming to fruition, and maybe some of the things people wouldn't necessarily think about in bringing that all together?
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I've realized is I've created products. I wrote an ebook. There's a free version on Tame Your Practice, and then there's a paid version. But one of the cores of the book is the 5-step process to choosing an EHR. And one of the things I've realized as I've also created products is that process is kind of universal and can apply to even creation of a product or marketing of a service. And so that first step is conceive, first coming up with that idea. What does this look like? How would people use it? And then the next step is assessing it. Okay, well, let's really look at this as talk to other people. Okay, this is how I see it. How do you see it? How would this look? What are the needs associated with this product? Okay, if I'm writing a book on, so one of my books is Private Practice Preparedness. It lets you create a plan for in case something happens to you, and you need to make sure your clients are taken care of. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what are all the things somebody's going to need in such a book? People talk about a professional will, but that doesn't always cover everything. Like, okay, well, how does somebody get into my EHR to be able to contact all of my clients and let them know that something's happened? Those kinds of things. So assessing what are all the things this product needs to do to be a viable product. Mm-hmm. And then once you've kind of fleshed that out, you've done a little bit of market research, it seems obvious that there's a need there that it can meet, then you evaluate. Okay, it's viable from a needs standpoint. There's a need there. People are asking for this, they've expressed interest in it. You've kind of fleshed out what it looks like. Can you actually do this? So let's say you do some research and you realize, okay, it costs me $30 to produce one of these widgets. Whether it's a service or a deck of cards, whatever, it costs you $30, but you've known in your research that people would only pay about $30 for it.
Right.
Well, unless you're independently wealthy and are doing this out of the generous spirit of your heart, that's not a viable business right there. Mm-hmm. So you either have to go back to the drawing board and look at, okay, can I produce it less expensively? Is there something I can change about it? That would still make it an in-demand product, but allow me to do it less expensively? Is there something I can add to it that would make people say, if you do this, I would pay twice as much, but maybe it doesn't cost you twice as much to produce that aspect. Mm-hmm. So coming to that final crunching of numbers to say, can I actually do this? Because I've seen people, and I've been tempted at this before, to dive into something that would be fun. Some people would need, but in the end, you'd make so little money at it, you'd just be working and working and working. And, there's no viable end. You want to look at things like long-term business viability, having an exit strategy. Like, is it a product or service you can sell to somebody else at some point? Those kind of things.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
And then you get into, okay, once you discover all that, actually going through the logistics of creating the product or service and maintaining it. Okay, is it something that just maintains itself? Like, let's say you're doing some kind of group counseling service. Okay, what happens after you finish the first group? How do you generate more people joining in and so forth?
Right. Yeah, so it's really, I think what's interesting about what you've been able to do is you've been able to kind of capture the process of okay, these are the different steps, the different phases of developing something. Again, whether it doesn't really matter whether it's a service or or product is to really begin to think about these things. There's that saying, I can't remember, no clue who the quote is attributed to, but if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? And
yeah.
I think I'm really guilty. I know for myself is that I am really attracted by shiny objects, creative things and new ideas about stuff. It just, and so I can get really excited about something. And I've learned the hard way, if you don't validate it, if you don't do the assessment and you don't evaluate and all of that, it can fall flat pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up that statement. And again, I don't have a specific attribution, but I use the same, I have to imagine a lot of us use the same discussion in sessions with our counseling and therapy clients that, hey, we got to figure out where we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Talk about where we're trying to get to, then we can make a plan to get there.
Right. Yeah. So to dig in just a little more, in figuring out what to price something, obviously you've got to crunch the numbers and know what it's going to cost you. But how do you figure that out?
That's a great question. And so a lot of these questions, including how do you produce something and how do you price it, a lot of those questions will depend on what you're producing and what that market looks like, and also what your goals are. So in other words, a lot of people will produce an ebook and give it away for free because they can do the ebook pretty expensively, and the ebook is used to draw in people. So you put out this free ebook, so they end up on your website to get the ebook, and then they end up on your mailing list and hopefully purchase services or products from you down the road.
Right.
So in that case, you're saying, oh, the pricing doesn't matter as long as it doesn't cost me too much to create and maintain this thing. I'll compare those numbers to the results. How many people do I end up gaining from this, and does it end up paying for itself, and so forth. But if you're actually trying to create a product or service that is self-sustaining, that is a revenue generator, then you have to start looking at, okay, what does it cost me to produce it? And what am I going to be able to sell it for? And so now I've got my profit, and now I've got to also carve out a little bit for marketing and other things. And okay, what does that mean? How many units do I think I'm going to sell? Is this a viable thing? Is it worth it? If this is going to net me $20K per year, is that something I want to get into? Will it be worth the time and effort to invest in that product? Does it have the potential to grow to be something bigger?
Right.
Like I knew would describe, okay, I'm going to produce these cards. If it's popular, I can always produce additional cards if people want them. And then, of course, I stumbled into that activity board, and it's growing and so forth. So part of it is not just, okay, what does it cost to produce it versus what I can sell it for, but long term, what does that look like? Is this a one and done thing? I'm going to produce this thing and a bunch of people are going to buy it and I'll never produce it again? Or is it something that will continue to grow and evolve?
Right. So are you I had a question in mind and then just completely lost it there, Rob. So with the describe cards, how do you anticipate them? What's the next phase, or do you see a next phase with those?
Right now, because Deck 2 just came out in December, and now the activity board has literally just landed on my doorstep within the last few days. And obviously, this is the end of August 2019. If somebody's listening to this 2 years from now, just to give them a time frame. So right now, I'm very focused on marketing the current products and see where it goes from there. The Deck 1 is actually in its third printing. I just received the third printing of Deck 1 this summer.
Wow.
So there's ongoing need for that. So my next step is to gauge, okay, I know there's a demand for a Deck 2, people that want more cards. I know there's a demand for the activity board. My question is how much demand? So that's my next phase, is to gauge, okay, I know I'm going to cover my costs of producing these and make a little bit of money on both Deck 2 and activity board, but will it blow up like Deck 1 is? So Deck One has been amazing because it's not just counselors using it. I've got families buying it. I've got coaches buying it. I've got teachers and speech therapists buying it. I've got ESL, English as a second language.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Buying it and using it to help people learn vocabulary and so forth. So it's marketed not just to counselors and therapists. And so the question is, will those people outside of counseling and therapy also be buying Deck 2 and the activity board? And if so, is there another product? Will there be more? Will people have a demand for more cards? Or will, these three products, be good enough?
Yeah.
I don't know that I don't have another, other than more cards. I don't have an idea right now. If they just continue to sell well, I'd be perfectly fine with that.
Right. One idea, I don't know if you've, unfortunately, Rob, I haven't looked at the deck closely enough. Are there any blank cards in there?
No, and I have thought about that. Honestly, if people wanted to make blank cards, they could go. There's a number of resources online where you can find blank playing cards. They just wouldn't have the described logo printed on the back of them.
I was just thinking one idea to throw at you is just using the dry erase idea. If there was another word that wasn't in the, which I can't imagine. I don't know how many different adjectives you've got, but it's a bunch.
Yes.
Yeah. But if somebody had another one just to be able to use to add to their pile.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about the activity board and the dry erase surface is they could add words on there. But there are 106. If you have Deck 1 and Deck 2, that's 162 adjectives. That's quite a few.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And there's 3 questions on each card too.
Yeah.
So even if you're just using it as an icebreaker to pull out questions, you've got more than enough. But yeah, more cards would be the obvious choice. I like the idea of blank cards. That could happen. So.
Wow. That's great. So I guess the other thing too is you recently revamped your website, the Tame Your Practice website.
Yeah, I did. That was a long time coming. That was a big project because that website's been around for 10 years.
Yeah.
So, it was starting to show its age a little bit. So again, even though the website itself isn't the product, it's kind of the analogy to the ebook I talked about earlier. I do those reviews. I write blog articles, have a number of free resources. There's a free member section for people that sign up where they can get discounts on different services. So it operates much like that ebook. It draws traffic, and then a good number of people then book consultation services with me. They say, hey, I want to take advantage of your expertise and help me choose the best EHR for my practice, or help me choose the best set of communication tools. And by the way, can you help me make sure I'm going to stay HIPAA compliant while choosing all this stuff? Those kinds of things.
Right.
And so that's the purpose that website serves. And I realized, okay, the website's starting to show its age. If I want to appear to be this tech expert, I really need to have a good looking website. It needs to not look like it's 5 or 6 years old. And I also wanted to make it a little cleaner, a little more user-friendly, and very mobile-friendly. My old site was mobile-friendly, but I wanted to make this one even more so.
Right. Well, it's a great-looking website. I love it. Love the way it's turned out. I was surfing through it this morning, and it looks great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, that was a lot of hard work.
It was.
I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out.
Did you outsource any of that, or did you just do it yourself?
Pieces and parts were outsourced. I'm not a graphic designer.
Okay.
So some of the images there that aren't logos of other products and so forth probably involved somebody doing some artwork for me. That's one thing. I've never been very artistic in that vein as far as graphic design and artistry. But all the tech, the website itself and the general look and feel. I didn't craft the theme. The theme of the website. It's built in WordPress.
Yeah.
And I know WordPress and can do all the nuts and bolts behind the scenes. But again, not a graphic designer, so I had somebody to create the theme for me. So the look and feel of it was what, I went out and purchased. Say, this is what I want
Yeah.
it to look and feel like, and I can plug everything in there.
Right. Yeah. It's, I think about that with my own website. It's probably particularly my therapy, my practice website is in need of some updates. And just the thought of that is just, it's a lot of stuff. And I'm just trying to figure out whether I should just go ahead and bite the bullet and outsource it, or just block off a week of time to redo it. So,
well, yeah, and that's another one of those times where you sit down and crunch some numbers. Okay, this is what it's going to cost. You do some research. This is what it's going to cost for me to totally hand it off to somebody else. This is how much time it's going to cost me to sit down and do it myself. You might want to factor in a little bit of self-care there. How much hair pulling am I going to do? How many hairs will I get doing it myself?
Yeah.
And then calculate, okay, is it worth it to pay somebody else? Do I have that time?
Right. Well, I've learned that the hard way several times. I had to, for the practice of therapy, I had to change servers because the traffic had gotten to where the server I was on couldn't handle it. And so and also just realized I needed some backend upgrades of a lot of stuff. The what's it called in WordPress? The thing that runs the PHP, the database.
Yes.
Was not up to date and all that sort of thing. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to touch this. Hire somebody to do this for me, and it was well worth the money I spent to do that.
Yeah, and again, I'm a techie, but there's so many moving parts to something like a WordPress site that you may not know SQL and database programming, or you may not know PHP, or you may not know CSS. And if your eyes are glazing over to hear any of these terms, then you need
that's
get some help.
Yeah,
because those are three important aspects to running any of these WordPress websites.
Right.
I ran into a similar problem when I got the Tame Your Practice upgrade done. The current web host, who I'd been happy with for years, just wasn't going to be able to support as well some of the new technologies I had added to make it a clean, efficient, mobile-friendly site. So I ended up having to move web hosts in the middle of that as well. Right. That is something you definitely want help with.
Right. Yeah. So, Rob, where are you going to be in the future? Are you still doing some conferences and such?
Yeah, I've taken a bit of a step back this year. Again, when we go back to talking about managing time and make sure there's time for self-care in there. The middle end of last year, I looked at this year. I said, okay, what's my priority for 2019? In 2018 and before, I was doing several conferences a year. I was even doing keynote presentations at a number of conferences. And I looked at 2019 and said, okay, well, Deck 2 is coming out in December 2018. I've got the activity board coming. I've got the relaunch of the Tame Your Practice website. Do I also want to be doing a lot of travel and presentations in the midst of this? And that's where I said, okay, we're going to deprioritize those things this year. And it was partly a time thing and partly, looking at the ROI, the return on investment. What return am I going to get for going to these conferences?
Right.
My name's already out there. People already know about Tame Your Practice and EHR. There are more effective ways for me to market Describe right now. So let's focus on producing these new products, starting to get the word out about it. And then starting this fall, I'm going to start heading back out to conferences again. And in 2020, I can see myself doing a number of conferences, especially to promote, the Describe. I'm coming up with another thing that came out of all of this is coming up with what I call all the things. For Describe. I've created a neat new gift box that's going to have Deck 1, Deck 2, and the activity board all in that box at a nice affordable price. So people who haven't already gotten into Describe can get it all at once, and it makes a great. So that's something I'll be heavily promoting starting this fall.
Maybe a little big for a stocking stuffer, but same concept.
Yeah. It would have to be a pretty big stocking to fit it in there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great, Rob. Well, folks, Rob, I want to be mindful of your time, uh, and I'm glad you uh, took up my invitation to come back, and I'm sure I'll have you back again to find out more about what you're doing. Tell folks again where they can find you and where they can get the Describe cards.
Yeah, so if they've heard this EHR talk and they're wondering about that, that's tameyourpractice.com. I also have articles up there about HIPAA compliance technology, all that fun stuff. Describe is at describecards.com. And one thing, that I didn't mention, when you talk about what's next for me, one thing I am strongly considering is taking on other people's products. I know there's other people out there that come up with cool ideas. And if it's in the same realm of Describe cards, whether it's a game or some deck of cards or something that counselors, therapists, teachers can use, I may look at being the publisher for other people.
Oh, wow.
I'm certainly open to consulting. If somebody wants to produce it themselves, I can give them some feedback on how to do that. But I'm also strongly considering publishing for other people. So Describe may grow into being a publishing house for those kinds of things.
Oh, wow. That'd be great. Great.
And people can reach out to me about that at describecards.com.
Right. Yeah. So if you've got an idea and you think, okay, this is something I would like to do with clients more or be able to use in the therapy room, Rob's your guy. He can help you kind of flush that out and figure out maybe how to go about doing that. So, well, Rob, again, thanks again for being on the podcast, and I'm sure I'll have you back.
Oh yeah, always enjoy talking with you, and I appreciate you having me on.
Okay, well, take care. Well, folks, I hope you have enjoyed getting to hear from Rob as much as I have again, and I'm so grateful to him for joining me on the podcast again. Do go over and check out the Describe cards, and again, you can get to that at describecards.com, and check out what he's got there. Also, go over to his website, tameyourpractice.com, and check out his resources there. He's got probably one of the best library of resources that I know of. And he was one of the people that, again, one of those people that kind of inspired me to start the practice of therapy, just in a sense of just kind of putting my own spin on what I've learned about private practice over the last several number of years. But anyway, do check out Rob's stuff, describecards.com, and then also tameyourpractice.com. And the other thing about Rob that I really love is that he has really kind of taken on kind of this entrepreneurial spirit in that, the traditional way of thinking about how we make income in our practices, it really can go beyond just that one-to-one face-to-face contact within the therapy room. Certainly it's what we love doing, and certainly it's the the foundation of what we do. And I think if we go into this work, that really needs to continue, at least for me personally, continue to be a big part of what we do. But as you grow and as you learn and as you begin to spread out into other avenues, I think it is a good idea to think about doing some other things besides just therapy. It really, like as I like to say, give yourself permission to do that. Sorry, I'm stuttering so much here at the very end. But anyway, just again, I'm grateful for Rob and all that he's got to offer. And so do check him out. Also, be sure and check out today's sponsor, Green Oak Accounting, and you can get to them at www.greenoakaccounting.com. And when you get in touch with them, let them know that you found out about them from the podcast, and they'll arrange a free consult so you can begin to maybe feel a little more confident about what you're doing in your bookkeeping and accounting. The other thing too, and speaking of Green Oak, is again a reminder about the webinar that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, coming up on September the 13th. So go and check that out at practiceoftherapy.com/how-to-make-money, or just go to practiceoftherapy.com, and there's a banner there at the top that'll give you access to where you can register for the webinar. And I hope to see you there. I'm always excited to meet people and find out about your stories and all that kind of stuff. So go check that out today. So, well, folks, I'm going to bring it to an end here. And so thank you for joining me today on the podcast, and looking forward to being in your ears and in your heads here in the future. This is a really weird ending. So never mind. Have a great weekend, folks. Take care. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.